Welcome to the Bible and Science. This is Dave Prentice. I'm a retired public high school teacher, certified in all branches of science and math. I've also taught on the Bible and Science for many years, both in the U.S. and on many overseas mission trips. This is the Bible and Science, episode 40. The previous episode was a bit out of sequence. It had to do with whether fish could have evolved into amphibians. And so I realized I should backtrack a bit and talk about some of the lower fossil-bearing strata where the invertebrates are supposed to have evolved during the Precambrian, the Cambrian, the Ordovician, Silurian, and so forth. So we'll get back to the idea that amphibians might have evolved into reptiles in the next episode. Going through the fossil record from bottom to top, you don't see a gradual development of more and more complex organisms from bottom to top. Instead, the lowest strata contain the kind of things you'd expect to find in ecological communities, biomes moving up from the bottom of the ocean towards sea level and beyond. The Precambrian, Cambrian, Ordovician, and Silurian contain only sea creatures. The Devonian, the next level up, contains mostly sea creatures but also has a relatively small number of land animals and plants. The land animals are primarily invertebrates such as insects and arachnids, spiders, that kind of thing. They also include a certain number of amphibians. That's what we would expect for a biome that's fairly close to sea level. Then moving up from there, the Pennsylvanian and Mississippian, which together are called carboniferous because they have a lot of carbon in them. Those are known for a large number of plants such as ferns. They also contain a relatively small number of shallow water animals. So these names in the geologic column. So these first living things would have been very simple cells, right? No, they ain't no such thing. Carl Sagan, who was a staunch evolutionist and an atheist, he noted that even the cells we call the simplest, such as bacteria, E. coli and others like it, they contain about as much information as 100 million Encyclopedia Britannica-sized pages. That's about 1/10 of the amount of information contained in the entire New York Public Library, concentrated into a single microscopic cell. So where'd all of that genetic information come from? There's no known living or fossil organism showing the gradual development of all of that genetic information. If you've already decided to rule out God, I don't know why you're watching this, but there would be no point. But unless you've decided to rule out God, I think you would have to look at all of the things I'm presenting and say a reasonable conclusion might be that even the simplest cells show intelligence, that they would more likely have begun by a direct creative act. Now, if you say, no, I refuse to believe in God, okay, that's it for you. But to me, I look at this and I say, it sure looks like it was a creative act by a super intelligent being. One of the things you'll find among the earliest fossils are traces of photosynthesis. This is done in the present by plants and things like that. And it takes the sunlight in, the energy from the sun, and uses it to store in the form of chemical energy, which can then be used by the plant and by other things that perhaps would eat the plant. Photosynthesis uses over 100 specialized proteins, such as the enzyme shown below, the PS2 enzyme, to produce glucose and other thermodynamically unfavorable molecules. They're called thermodynamically unfavorable because they don't come together by themselves. They have to be forced to come together. And these enzymes force them to come together. So Precambrian stromatolites, as far as we can tell, seem to have used the same process of photosynthesis as modern plants do. So somewhere along the way, the process would have had to evolve. So what's involved in photosynthesis? The mechanism is not fully understood. We do know that it uses microscopic components called grana, chloroplasts, and chlorophyll. Photosynthetic systems work in a way similar to electronic circuits and also similar to motors. Photosynthesis, though, is at least 85% efficient in its use of the energy in sunlight. Our best photosynthetic devices are usually less than 20% efficient, although there are some that would say we've occasionally gotten some devices up to 40% efficient. That's still less than half of the efficiency of photosynthesis, which is supposed to be a blind process as a result of accidental evolutionary changes. There's no such thing as a simple cell. There's nothing simple about even those plants we call the oldest. So somehow we've got one single cell that came into existence by chemical processes, right? No, I don't believe that. But still, most organisms, when you consider the number of them, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions, they consist of a single cell, and that cell has to perform all of the necessary functions of life. It has to take in nutrition, excrete wastes, move, grow, etc. So even if the single cells live in large colonies, such as colonial protozoans, each cell still has to take care of its own needs. But if you consider something like that stromatolite and you compare it to the stromatolite I showed you on the previous slide, they haven't evolved. Every other living thing except for single-celled organisms consists of anywhere from tens of thousands to trillions of specialized cells. You have heart cells, lung cells, kidney cells, and so forth. Even the simplest multi-celled organisms have specialization. So each of these cells, specialized cells, is going to perform specific functions needed by the organism. No one cell does everything. So somewhere along the way, life had to evolve the drive, the need, the mechanism where different cells would specialize in different functions. I don't believe that. I would hope that you're intelligent enough to say, no, this is no accident. There are no living or fossil transitions showing how multi-celled creatures with specialized functions might have evolved from single-celled organisms. Okay, let's think of plants. Plants are supposed to be relatively simple. The Precambrian stromatolites are identical to modern blue-green algae. They have not evolved supposedly in 3.5 billion years, and meanwhile humans are supposed to have evolved all the way from apes in less than 1 million years, 1/3000th of that amount of time. So there are no ancient plants that have evolved that we can trace evolution of. In the Devonian, Pennsylvanian, Cretaceous, and so forth, there are many other modern plants, such as oaks, willow, magnolia, sassafras, palms, and so forth. They're found alongside the dinosaurs, and they have not evolved. So you can look in the fossil record and you'll see preserved parts of Devonian trees and scouring rushes and flowering plants and so forth. So what was the first cell? If you believe in evolution, what was it? You don't know. There is no idea that any evolutionist has for what the first cell might have been. And then how did it evolve into things like blue-green algae, stromatolites? How might it have evolved from that into the Cambrian sea or land plants or any other type of plant? To put it bluntly, we can't trace the evolution of a single group of plants from its supposed evolutionary beginning until the present. These are supposedly the earliest known organisms, Precambrian stromatolites, blue-green algae, dated at about 3.5 billion years old. This is supposedly shortly after life began by chemical processes. But the blue-green algae have not evolved in 3.5 billion years. And humans are supposed to have evolved from some ape-like ancestor in less than 1 million years. Things forgot to evolve. So when you hear people talk about the missing link between ape and man, there's nothing but missing links in the fossil record. Think about the first type of cell. What was it? We don't know. What were the transitions from the first cells to the known kingdoms or domains, animal, plant, algae, fungi, and so forth? What were those transitions? We don't have any idea. What would be a transition between single-celled and multi-celled organisms? Those are unknown. What is the evolutionary history of plants? We don't have the origin of even one type of plant documented. Okay, and then there's soft-bodied invertebrates that appear in the fossil record. The Ediacaran fauna, what's their origin? We don't know. Missing links. Okay, the Cambrian fossils. We'll talk later about the Cambrian explosion. We don't know where they came from. What are the transitions leading up to them? How about vertebrates, going from invertebrates to vertebrates? We don't know what their origin is. We can propose guesses, but we don't have any documentation. And land animals, which we talked about in the last episode about amphibians. What's the origin of land animals? We don't know that. Okay, and then the next episode we'll talk about how might amphibians have evolved into land animals, into reptiles. We don't know that. Okay, how about the origin of birds, mammals, apes, humans, everything else? We don't know any one of them. We don't have anything documented by fossil transitions. They're nothing but missing links. In the animal kingdom, depending on who's doing the classifying, some scientists break down the animal kingdom into anywhere from 23 to 36 phyla. But at least one specimen of every phylum of the animal kingdom appears in Cambrian rocks. There's only one phylum, which is Chordata. It includes vertebrates. That's animals with backbones. The vertebrates are represented in the Cambrian by at least 3 genera of fish. These are not just all soft-bodied invertebrates. No, there are 3 genera of fish known in the Cambrian. Anatolepis, Hycoichthyes, you try to pronounce that, and Mylocunmingius. Those are all jawless fish of class Agnatha. The vast majority of animals in the world today and in the fossil record are invertebrate. There are a large number of the fossils that belong to the following phyla: the annelids, the arthropods, the cnidarians, the echinoderms, the mollusks, the nematodes, the poriferous, platyhelminthes, the flatworms. So we have all of these different groups. What's the ancestor? We don't have any one of them. They appear in the fossil record suddenly and fully formed. We don't have anything leading up to a single one. Some of the major fossils that are used as indices, index fossils, are trilobites. If you find something in only one community of fossils, you can use it anytime you find it as an index fossil. So trilobites are some of the most common index fossils for Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian strata. They do occur as high up as the Permian, which is generally land animals. There have been thousands of names assigned to trilobite species, but the number may be vastly inflated because if you look over on the right, you'll see there's one kind of trilobite that as it grew, went through different stages of development, and it would shed a lot of its body structures and be identified as a new species. No, it's not. A species is defined by the ability to reproduce, and these things, as we found more and more of them, we found out that, no, they're all one species. One trilobite can give you 17 different fossil names. So how do we really know they're different species? We can't do breeding experiments. Somebody just assigns a name and says, well, they have to be different species. So here's some examples of trilobites. The basic plan of a trilobite is that the body has 3 lobes, so left, center, and right. So the body has 3 lobes. And most of the trilobite eyes had thousands of crystalline lenses arranged in a way ideally suited to correct for distortion. If you want to describe it mathematically, the mathematics of the lenses were not even worked out until the 1700s. So fossils contain a great many trilobites. You can find them in a number of different suites of fossils, but none of them evolve. Trilobites probably couldn't move very far or very fast, so the reason they're found in the oceanic type beds, we would think, is because they will have quickly been buried by the rising sediments of the flood. These are some of the Cambrian trilobites that you can see on the screen there. Also, Ordovician trilobites, which differed somewhat, and they were found in a different community of fossils. And these are some other creatures of the Ordovician. I'm going from the bottom. We had the Precambrian, the Cambrian, the Silurian, the Ordovician. Okay, so here we're on the Ordovician. And those are some of the fossils that are found in the Ordovician. And I'm just showing you a few little individuals. There's hundreds of billions of these things out there. Incredible numbers. So the Ordovician animals and plants seem to have lived in the sea at slightly shallower depth than the bottom dwellers of the Cambrian. Most of these creatures had very limited mobility. Some more Ordovician creatures. A big old trilobite over there on the left that got folded over, and several other ones. But look at that, there's a crab. I live in South Louisiana, and we love crabs. They're delicious. Look at that. They haven't changed since the Ordovician. In the Silurian, Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, okay, the Silurian seascape would look pretty much like what you see in the ocean today, except it's a bit deeper. And so the animals that thrive at lower depths are not the same that thrive in less pressure and more sunlight up higher. So that's an artist's conception of a Silurian sea bottom. It's characterized by reefs more than anything else. These are some of the other creatures found in the Silurian: chain corals, brachiopods, crinoids, more corals, snails, big old snails, nautiloids. A nautiloid looked kind of like an octopus, but it had a shell. So the Silurian is known as the age of reefs because the animals and plants lived in shallower waters, and they either formed reefs or lived around the reefs. These are some other early life, supposedly early life, complex critters from the Devonian. You got echinoderms and crinoids and sea scorpions and brittle star and a great many different kinds. I'm just showing you a few little specimens, but there are millions and millions and millions. And let's think about the Devonian. Moving up, we've been at ocean bottom, coming up a little shallower, Now we're close to sea level. The Devonian is known as the age of fishes because there's so many types that are not found in lower levels in the Precambrian, Cambrian, Ordovician, and Silurian. These appear in the Devonian suddenly and fully formed with no known ancestors. In many cases, the types of fish that appeared in the Devonian are still living in the world today. If you think back to an earlier episode, one of the things that Dr. Stephen Jay Gould said, and he hated when we creationists quoted him, was that the fossil record demonstrates sudden appearance. We don't have a gradual development of things. And it also demonstrates stasis. Things just don't change. So when you get to the Devonian, you have a bunch of things appearing suddenly, and they don't evolve. Here's some other things considered early insects, spiders, crustaceans from the Carboniferous. Carboniferous together is consisting of the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. It's called Carboniferous because there's so much carbon-containing material. But there are insects, like in the dragonflies, in nautiloids, and the Archimedes. I don't know if anybody has ever realized, where did the screw come from that we use all over the place? Well, the ancient Greek Archimedes invented it from looking at things in nature. So there's some pretty good design in nature. So those are some pretty good sized insect wings. They're compared to a cell phone up at the upper right. There have been over 40,000 species of insects, spiders, and arthropods identified. What are the transitional forms between them? None. Don't have a single one. So there's also in the Carboniferous, there's more and more and more things. There's a spider shown up there, and also a dragonfly, a crinoid, a jumble of crinoids, and a jumble of brachiopods, shelled animals, corals, cockroaches. Cockroaches have been here all along since the beginning. So, like every other type of fossil, these groups show no trace of evolution from their lowest appearance in the fossil record, which is supposedly their oldest, to their highest appearance, which is supposed to be the youngest, the latest. So what have we seen so far? In the Precambrian, we have the type of creatures that would have done well at the bottom of the ocean. Well, how did they get there? They're supposed to have evolved at sea level and then somehow decided to dive down to the bottom of the ocean. Well, I don't know why they would have decided to do that and how they would have survived the intense pressure. Sea level, you don't have a whole lot of pressure. If you go to the bottom of the ocean, there's a lot of pressure. So the Precambrian, and then somehow they're supposed to have evolved into the Cambrian. It's a separate suite of fossils. There are certain things we look for in the Cambrian, and we identify the fossil suite based upon that, and we say, oh, look at that, it's more evolved. And then we go up to the Ordovician, there's a different suite of fossils. The Silurian, different suite of fossils. Devonian, different suite of fossils. Now, granted, there are going to be some things that are found in more than one suite of fossils. For instance, if you look in the world today, you're going to see rats are everywhere. You can't get rid of the rats. The cockroaches, they're everywhere. But generally, you're going to see fairly clearly defined suites of fossils. That's how we'll identify what kind of rock it is and supposedly how old it is. In the next episode, we're going to get back to the idea of amphibians and reptiles, and we've previously talked about how the evidence indicates that fish did not evolve into amphibians. So next time we'll talk about how the evidence indicates that amphibians did not evolve into reptiles. Well, hope you're enjoying this, and I do ask that you pass it on to friends if anybody's skeptical about all this creationism stuff, which I believe because I'm a biblical creationist. So pass it on, please. Tell people to go to thebibleandscience.net or look for the Bible and Science on Spotify and various other podcast apps.